Afternoon again, everyone. And for those of you who joined us over the past few weeks, welcome back. If you're new to all of this, welcome. I'm Mark Heatley. I'm the Executive Director of the Ivey Academy. That's the Learning and Development wing of Ivey Business School in London. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you actually for your tremendous support you've shown the school since the world changed in the middle of March. We know you have lots of competing interests and priorities right now, and we sincerely hope you've gotten some value from these live streams. We hope you do again today. Before we start, I also wanted to acknowledge some important work and some important folks in our community. There are faculty and staff at the university doing some really great things in research and in thought leadership. We hope that's already made some kind of impact, and we hope it continues to. But then there are the folks out there wearing gloves and masks every day to ensure that we can buy our groceries and have water and power in our homes, and people with healthcare needs get taken care of. They're keeping the economy, frankly, our society going. And so to everyone that's working in those jobs at the business school, really humbled by the work you do. It's noticed by us, it's appreciated by us. Thank you. Today, we're lucky to be joined by our mayor, Ed Holder. The mayor has been good enough to give us an hour of his time. And in 15 or 20 minutes, we'll also be joined by a couple of colleagues who run important organizations in London, who we're proud to have as partners in some programming we run locally. Gerry Macartney, head of the Chamber of Commerce, and Kapil Lakhotia, head of London Economic Development Corp, will come in a few minutes. And just one note here, I did get a note ahead of time about the lack of diversity in our session today. So apologies in advance for that. We didn't start by thinking about building a panel. We reached out to the mayor and then to some of our school partners. But regardless, it's the note's well taken. It's noted. We'll do better next time. As always, we have our executive producer, that's Sean Ackland Grant, with us. Sean's going to keep the train on the tracks today. So let's start by introducing Mayor Ed Holder. Ed was sworn in as London's 64th mayor on December 1st, 2018. Prior to being elected to City Council, Ed served as a member of Parliament for London West and was Federal Minister of Science and Technology. Ed studied at UWO, so he's not going to get the gears too badly from us today. He worked many years in the insurance industry as founder of Directors Club of London, a business networking group. He's also served as president of the London Chamber of Commerce, president of the London Club, chair of the London Convention Center, and a member of Western's Board of Governors and Senate. Ed is proud to call London home for close to 4 decades. Throughout his time in the city, his focus has been twofold: successfully building businesses and giving back to the community. So Mr. Mayor, my only goal today really is to get a juicy scoop from you, and anything you want to share off the hop.
Chilly this weekend. I would say to you that no special scoop. Some little pieces might come out, some of the questions that we're asking, but when we scoop, we tend to put that in a press release form so we can get all the credit we deserve. So, but the thing I would like to say, and it's something you said, Mark, at the front end in terms of our frontline and first responders, they've done one incredible job. The scoop is, and this is the thing that you're going to hear in a few minutes, that from yesterday to today, this is perhaps the one thing, we've had one COVID diagnosis. It's the lowest we've had since we've been monitoring this over the last several weeks. When the medical officer of health and I do our daily press conference, which will happen at 2 o'clock today, which we live stream, he'll talk more about that as well. But I think that really is a testament to how Londoners have absolutely responded through this pandemic. And when we've asked them to self-distance, we've meant it, because it saves lives, their own families, their friends, and people they come in contact with. And people have been pretty good about it. If I had a little bit of concern was this past weekend, when although we only had one bylaw enforcement charge of somebody thinking it was a really good idea to scale a secure fence to go onto a soccer field, we actually had 132 warnings. And the approach that London has taken has been, frankly, to encourage people not to find ways to empty their bank account. That's always an option, but that's not what we're trying to do. So bylaw enforcement's done a great job, but more importantly, most Londoners done an incredible job. And I think the result that is today, with that one diagnosis, I think that's pretty good news.
What's your kind of assessment of the city over the last 6 or 7 weeks? Like, how are we doing?
Well, 2 months ago, we wouldn't have been having this particular discussion, because who knew that it was going to ramp up to the levels that it has worldwide. But like every community across the world, we've had to try to find the measures that work in our city. On balance, our average of deaths and our diagnoses of COVID have been pretty stable and below the Ontario norm. So I'll take that as positive news. But you will know that every municipality in this province are creatures of the province. So when the premier says crowds of no more than 5, we follow that. When we talk about the 2 meters physical distancing, we follow that, but we really preach it. And this is where Londoners have been great. Look, it's been tough on business. Some won't survive. We know that. And I have great empathy coming from a medium business that I ran to small businesses that my family currently has. We know our sales are down 50%. It's in food related, cupcakes and chocolates, and cakes. But I will tell you, it impacts everybody. So the reality is that small, medium, large businesses are trying to find their new normal. They're trying to find how they can do things differently. Some are prospering because they're able to support the COVID pandemic and deal with this in a way that has been helpful to the community, but also generally good for business. But that's not the norm. The norm is that businesses are struggling, and as soon as we can open up, and you'll know that the premier set a three-stage approach to opening the community up, and in particular the business community. So what you saw that happened as of yesterday was that garden centers could now open up in terms of doing not only delivery but pickup as well. And there are rules around that, but that's what they've done. The second is in relation to and so what that's allowed us to do is to even prepare our park areas and all in terms of making sure we tend to the grass and the gardening and things that need to get done. But we do that again, even as a municipality, with the rules that we've set in terms of distancing and the like. Marinas and golf courses are now able to prepare and be ready for that as well. But until we can open up the economy more, it's a challenge. But again, I will tell you that Londoners have done a pretty good job, both as individuals and as businesses, in responding to this, and I take my hat off to them.
Absolutely. I know we'll talk a fair amount more about the business community and economic outlook when we have Kapil and Gerry join us. Just one more health question, and then I want to talk a bit about kind of governance right now. On the health side, we had a panel of doctors and health experts on about 2 weeks ago. They were fantastic, just so insightful, and they talked a lot about kind of vulnerable populations, homeless, those that need home care, and it's not a I don't actually have any background here. Just wondering if that has come up, if that's a point of conversation in your office, and how you're thinking about it, if at all.
Mark, it's a constant conversation. One of the things that I did was I struck 2 mayor's task forces, one on economic impact and recovery, and the second on social impact and recovery. So just focusing on the most vulnerable. You know, when I was elected back in December 18, I had 3 areas of focus. One was about jobs, the second related to transit and transportation, and the third related to London's most vulnerable. Big topic and a huge one. And what I've come to appreciate through this, as we've heard recommendations and input from frontline agencies and those who look after our most vulnerable, and our own municipality's responsibility there, we have engaged 135 hotel rooms for those who need more social isolation in terms of healthcare. And it's why every day, the press conference I have with the medical officer of health, we talk about the impacts on the community. And part of it is just the physical, the other is the mental, the impacts around total isolation. And certainly our own medical officer of health is not recommending isolation. He's saying go outside and take a walk. But if you do, you self-distance and you don't hang around with neighbors. And so I would say to you that our council is possessed with how we deal with our most vulnerable. The departments within City Hall that deal with this as well. Not only do we have something called community informed response, where we daily check on our homeless, those who sleep rough, and where it's appropriate and where they're willing, and that's the other piece, put them into isolation. We can do that as necessary if there's illness, but in terms of trying to protect them as well. And that's the whole spirit behind this. London supported, our council supported the Core Area Action Plan, which is not just downtown, it's all of Dundas East as well. Areas where a lot of our most vulnerable tend to congregate. And so as a result of that, that takes a lot of our efforts to ensure that we keep them safe and we keep all of Londoners safe. It's a big job. But this is where this is where our frontline agencies have done a really strong job. In fact, one of the things that, in speaking to Glenn Pearson, the food bank executive, co-executive director, one of the responsibilities he took on as a result of our social impact and recovery task force was to provide lunches available for agencies to provide for those most in need. And he's got the cooperation of the London Convention Center, RBC Place, we call it now. And they prepare the lunches there, and then that starts tomorrow. And we've been taking the information from agencies, what their needs are, and it will grow, because certainly what we've heard around the task force is that there are a number of agencies that are strapped for food. We know that both the United Way of London and the London Community Foundation, what they have done is they've done major fundraising to be able to provide financial supports for those frontline agencies, and they've given out about 30 grants to this point to agencies to provide with the work that they do, some involving food, some involving supports for personal protective equipment, some involved with how you deal with the housing aspects of our most vulnerable. So it is absolutely one of the two priorities, which is why I made it a focus of the one task force. And the net effect, I think, has been positive. Interestingly, there have been no COVID diagnoses from those who are most vulnerable, because we've paid that kind of care, and I think that's important. So the priority around our most vulnerable lives beyond this pandemic. It was a priority before. It's intensified for obvious reasons now, and it will continue to be as we go forward.
That's great. Congrats on those efforts and the low numbers. That's great to hear. I know it was a huge concern of that panel that we had on. A question about governance. So you talked about two task forces. We've got down teams at the business school looking at scenarios and recovery as well. What kind of indicators are they looking at? What kind of information are they using to make their decisions? And do you kind of have like a regular back channel with Queen's Park that's helping you inform some of the decisions? I just want to get a bit of a view on how they're doing their work.
Well, first, they have lots of back channels with Queen's Park. You have to have at this time. Yeah. I talk pretty regularly with the Minister of Health and with the Minister of Housing, because Housing and Municipalities, Steve Clark, has responsibility for both. Those are regular conversations that we have, and directly through the Premier's office, through my connections there. I said when I was elected that the relationship with senior governments is so critical, and that no municipality can do it alone. That's never been more obvious than now, because right now we're bleeding cash as all municipalities across the country are doing. I think we're projected to run somewhere in the range of about $33 million of unanticipated costs that will by the end of June, and that will balloon to 35 million by the end of August. That's with what we know today, and that's not insignificant, because that was, again, not budgeted. So we've certainly spoken to senior people at the federal and provincial government. Right now, we are in usually weekly discussions as the big city mayors of Canada with the Deputy Prime Minister, and we have through the larger mayors of Ontario ongoing discussions with the minister responsible for municipal governments as well as housing. So those are regular conversations that take place independent of. Some of the stats we get are informed by what we receive from the medical officer of health, because he reports on our region, and our region is defined as London and Middlesex. The bulk of those, you'd imagine, and it's true, come from the City of London. So when we talk about diagnoses, we talk about where they come from, and be it long-term care or adult residences. We know that's where the bulk of deaths are coming from, and the bulk of diagnoses as well. So we keep pretty sharp attention to that. Plus, with our community informed response team, we've got our handle on the street as well in terms of what the situation is relating to those people. And we know when it's time and when we can to bring them in and provide for them. We had one group, the Unity Project, and they just did not have the facilities because of the proximity of our most vulnerable. They reported back to us. So everyone who was a resident at the Unity Project is now housed in hotel space, and so there's part of that becomes our approach to how we deal with this, and it's a fluid situation because
for sure,
depending on the circumstances associated with how many more diagnoses. I know through one thing that we do, and you should be aware, and that is that every morning we have a virtual meeting in the Emergency Operations Center. That's the same center we used when we had the Woodman explosion last August, and we had all hands on deck. So participating and providing information to us includes the Chief Medical Officer of Health in that session. We have the police chief, the fire chief, EMS, so that's our ambulance service. We have London Health Sciences and St. Joe's, the two primary hospitals. And we have their reports as well in terms of the number of people that are currently in hospital. Those are in ICU unit. And we have feedback from Hydro. We have our city manager and all the departments heads that report in as well. So on a day, and we've had that daily meeting for the last 6 weeks. And that gives us 7 now, I guess. So that gives us a pretty strong sense of what is out there in the community. I think we have a pretty good handle on where we need to put our resources. And now we just need some additional support and help from our senior levels of government.
That's great. It feels like there's a fairly high level of coordination. Nobody's operating blind. I know we're going to bring in our guests here in a minute, but I was wondering if you'd be okay with just take 2 quick questions that have come in from the audience. By the way, to everyone who's submitting questions, we won't get to all of them, and we apologize for that, but we'll do what we can in a follow-up if we don't get to them live. So the first question is about the lunches at RBC Place that you mentioned. Are those being prepared by volunteers?
They're being prepared, supervised by Glenn Pearson personally. We're getting support from YOU as well, from staff there as well. So, for example, tomorrow we know that we have got about 90 lunches that have been pre-ordered. So anyone that prepares the lunches, that's either staff of YOU, and also we will have some volunteers in that process as well.
That's great.
And, they've been great to stand forward and help us.
That's great. And we'll use maybe the second question as a bridge, talking a little bit more about business. So there's a question here about the city task forces, and are they engaging business as they do their work, either of them?
The Economic Impact and Recovery Task Force is all businesses, and it's associations. So, for example, on the line is Kapil Lakhotia from LEDC, and he's part of our Economic Impact and Recovery Task Force, as is Gerry Mccartney on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. But from the construction, now what we've done is we've subdivided. There were so many that we engaged on the economic side that we subdivided that into 4 groups. In fact, we're going to be ordering up a 5th group just to make sure that some are specific. So construction and trades, how we get London building again. I would tell you, just as a quick aside, that London City Council has approved a number of city construction projects, because under the legislation set by the province, if they're deemed essential, then we are able to carry on. And we started 3 projects yesterday right here in London. That's great for employment, but at the same time, it says that that we have to get London going again, and we haven't delayed those projects. We have at least a dozen that have been approved, and we're spacing those out as we're able. 3 again started yesterday, and a lot in terms of sewers and water mains, and particularly in areas, honestly, where there would otherwise be high traffic, but less traffic now for obvious reasons. And so we are able to engage those and get those started. And we think that's important, particularly at this time. But we have from small and medium and large size businesses, all independent of our social task force, so that we can understand what the impact. We had to start with understanding what the impacts were, and now we're moving towards what I call disaster recovery. How you go from where you are now, how you do your business going forward, and we've issued one major report. The second is in the writing, and now we're working towards the recommendations of recovery and to help support businesses throughout our economy here in London, just to assist them in whatever ways. I think probably the last time we really took disaster recovery seriously was probably 9/11, when people realized the impacts of that. We dust them off from time to time. I'm worried about small and medium-sized businesses that haven't put their minds to it, but are being forced to now.
So a good time, I think, to bring our guests in. What we've both made mention of Gerry and Kapil. So let's bring them in. Gerry Mccartney is the CEO of the London Chamber of Commerce since 1996. Gerry served in this role, oversees the daily operations of the chamber, including budgeting, human resources, property. He's the chamber's chief spokesperson, media contact. Gerry oversees all community and chamber sponsorship opportunities. Well, pretty well known guy in the community. And Kapil Lakhotia is the CEO of London Economic Development Corp, an economist by training. Maybe Kapil, I should have talked to you a couple of weeks ago when I was trying to do some of that work. Kapil has implemented a bold new strategic plan with a strong focus on workforce development, entrepreneurship, as well as forming local, national, and international partnerships that drive London forward. Kapil's deeply involved in the London community as a member of the Fanshawe College Board of Governors, King's University College Board of Directors, and the Canadian Centre for Product Validation. So, Gerry, maybe I could start with you. How do you think local businesses and the business community is coping through this crisis?
It's a good question, and thanks for doing this, Mark. I appreciate that. Sorry about my technical issues here, where I seem to crash every second Zoom conference call I'm on. And you're spared my ugly face anyway, so that's a good thing. What are businesses concerned about a lot? Obviously, many of them have been devastated, and some will not return, as the mayor pointed out earlier. What number that is, we don't know. But there's been significant losses in terms of sales and profits, and importantly, loss of human resource. There's many people have been laid off. The numbers we're hearing are hovering around 2 million, maybe 3 million by the time this is all over. So the sooner we get by this, the better. Obviously, all the federal supports have been quite useful and quite welcome. In some cases, not enough. In some cases, too much. But I think the speed with which they got those things out the door is admirable. I'd rather have them out quickly than trying to get some kind of perfect scenario, which would never happen anyway. Province is coming along the way it should. I fully support this sort of staged implementation. I think most businesses would agree, although impatient. We all want to get back to that normal if we can, but it's going to be difficult and it's going to take some time.
Kapil, a perspective from you on the folks that you're talking to.
Like the mayor mentioned earlier as well, like most businesses around the globe, London companies also woke up to uncertainty and panic. And especially hard hit are the businesses that rely on foot traffic, like hair salons, restaurants, and many retailers in our downtown and other areas. But many of our companies have also pivoted during this time wherever possible, from pivoting to online sales or entirely new product lines in many cases. London is also fortunate to have a well-diversified economy that is better able to withstand economic shocks. We've also seen many areas of our economy, like food processing, advanced manufacturing, and technology industries, to name a few, that have held steady and in many cases were able to grow during this time as well. Companies like Trudell Medical, Dr. Utker, Nestle, and many more are examples of companies that are hiring even during this time to keep up with current market demand.
A question for all of you, if you've got examples. We've heard tell of some innovative things that are being done by businesses. You talked about pivots or just interesting things they're doing from a customer service perspective, or trying to stay in touch with the community. Just any kind of good stories to share.
Well, I think Kapil mentioned a few. In terms of chamber members, we have an actual website that we feature members doing good things, and I can't stress enough the kind of generosity and support that many of our members and the wider business community have demonstrated over this period. And we've only featured on that website those people that are doing things for free. There's a whole host of other folks that are doing things at a significant discount or with some attachment to it, but it's just amazing the kind of generosity and care and compassion that our business community has, not only for each other, but those that are less fortunate than us. So lots of things going on. I'm very proud of the joint website that both Kapil and I, over the mayor's task force calls, numerous times we heard from many people saying, I wish we had a website where all of the updates could be contained in one spot, where we could learn about all the various support programs and subsidies. And we took upon ourselves to actually create such a website. So it's there now. It's the COVID-19 business portal. And anybody who wants to go check it out, we try and keep it up to date at least 2 to 3 times a day. And I'm very happy that we took that task on. And it all came out of the mayor's task force.
Let me add to that if I can. There are some great stories out there. We've got situations, for example, where Labatt's here in London has converted some of their line for hand sanitizers, and we think that that's an important piece. Western and Sterling Marking Products working to make those mask shields that are necessary. Collins Clothier is making masks, and they're donating those. Another clothing company making gowns in response to what the need is. So what you're finding is that local companies are being exceptionally resourceful, trying to help where they can, and keep their people employed, but at the same time doing this because it's the right thing to do. So just a few examples, and there's many, many more of those as well.
Yeah, just to build on those comments, the mayor mentioned a lot of good examples within our manufacturing and healthcare areas. Technology sector has also seen a lot of innovative things being done locally, including some leading video games that are being produced locally, as well as entertainment content by companies like Braun Animation and more, to provide people with those entertainment content while they're working from home or remotely. We also have a lot of technology companies that are creating portals to link businesses with e-commerce platforms, available supports in the community, and so on. And another piece I'd like to add is our research organizations at both Western University and Fanshawe College that are actively working with local companies on prototyping, reverse engineering, and other R&D activities to serve the current needs of our healthcare community.
So I'm just watching the questions and the comments coming in through the chat. Good news for all of you. We're being asked where that site is, what the site address is. We're being asked where your press conference is streamed live, Mr. Mayor. So we'll make sure to comment and distribute that as we wrap up. Sean, just noting that. We want to move on and talk a lot about recovery, but one more question before we go there. What are the current kind of supports, resources that are in place, whether they're, and I'm not talking about the federal or provincial programs, but things specific to London. Are there resources, are there websites, are there specific programs that businesses can tap into as they try to navigate their way toward recovery? Maybe we'll start with the mayor, please.
Sure. In terms of some of the specifics that we're doing locally, one of the things that we chose to do was to defer property taxes over the next 60 days. We thought that was an important support that we could provide. One of the limitations that any municipality has in Ontario is that we cannot run a deficit. That's provincially legislated. So as a result of that, the restriction that we have is there's only so much that we can do that has specific impacts. So if we can defer penalties, or eliminate penalties and interest, we've done that as well. So we think that that's a pretty significant component of the range of where we can go. The other thing that we thought was important by striking the task force for economic recovery was to challenge businesses to help us understand what their needs were, but also where they can go as well. I'll come back to you later on if we have time to talk about where we live stream our press conferences, and we've got several. But I would tell you that within the bounds of what we're able to do, we have been able to provide. We have not chosen to eliminate taxes. I mean, that's not a practical option for us because of the limitations that municipalities have. But when you can defer and eliminate fees and penalties, that's something. And at the local level for individual residents, there have been things like if people want to go to our depot where they can take their waste, be it lawn waste and the like. We've eliminated the fees associated with that because, again, we're trying to find ways to make that easier for Londoners. And I never forget that it's London business, but it's Londoners who have that real, true impact on the businesses that they work at. So if we help Londoners, I think we're also helping businesses as well. And we have a whole host of range of options that we put in place for Londoners as well.
Gerry, could we go to you next? Anything specific you want to comment on in terms of resources or advice you would give to businesses as they work their way toward recovery?
Yeah, there's some good information on the Canadian Chamber website. That's just chamber.ca if anybody's interested in looking it up. The Canadian Chamber led the charge with 60 other business organizations to form the Business Resiliency Network right across Canada. So it's the top 60 business organizations headed up by the Canadian Chamber, offering all kinds of information about startups, what you need to look for in terms of the health concerns. We're getting a lot of questions from our members about what do they need to do to get ready to reopen? And you're hearing Ford and others saying, look, get ready. Retail is going to be a couple of weeks. You might see golf courses a week after that. But how do you actually prepare? And I'm hearing from some businesses that they're talking to their employees, wondering about when they can be either rehired or get back to work safely. What does safely look like? Are we going to be wearing masks and gowns? Are we going to be distancing 6 feet apart? Sanitizing? And I think the answer to that is yes in all cases, at least until we see what this new normal looks like. I would also offer that apart from that Business Resiliency Network, we're putting together some tips ourselves, and we'll be putting that out next week on what you should be looking for in terms of starting back up in business again and getting back to, hopefully, profitability.
Bill, how about you? Any resources or advice?
Yes, absolutely. We're taking a business as virtual approach. So there's a lot of resources, webinars, and online delivery channels that are being deployed across the board in London by a variety of business support partners in London. This includes, sharing best practices and guidance from experts on how to plan for that recovery. So we've had over the last couple of weeks several experts in workforce development, financial services, banking, and other areas to help people figure out their path to recovery. It includes accessing capital, figuring out a workforce recovery and resiliency plan in terms of retention of skilled talent and recruitment where growth is happening. In fact, on May 12th, we are hosting the first virtual job fair where about 35 companies are already participating, and these companies are looking to grow and hire. So we're trying to do the best we can in the current climate to adopt to a more virtual and online platform.
I'd like to.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, Mark, I'd
Go
like
ahead.
to jump in on one more, a couple of quick points. Firstly, as it relates to business in London and the recovery, particularly from the health component as we reopen businesses and those who have maintained their ability to stay open. One of the things I would recommend people do is to go to the Middlesex London Health Unit's website from the health standpoint. And there's a lot of information for businesses that might support how they approach the recovery from their standpoint. The second point is that right now in London, according to London Planning Council, Employment Planning Council, there are about 3,200 jobs that are currently waiting to be filled in the city. It was a higher number, closer to 5,000 pre-COVID, about 4,800 on average. But that's londonjobsnow.ca. And the nice thing about that is we took that website, or we created that website because one of the things that we recognized is that there was a disconnect between employers hiring and those looking for work. So we actually took Windsor's jobs website. With their support, we also made it London friendly and London specific. And not only does it indicate where the jobs are through various companies that are hiring, but it also ties in, when you overlay it, the transit, if that's one of the ways that people need to get to work. And then it overlays as well the daycare center availability as well, which again, as they open up more fully, will become important to some people. So it's updated on a very consistent basis. Every couple of hours it's updated. So it's as current as it comes. And we think that the job fair that Kapil has just cited will be very useful as well for those who are looking to connect to employers in town because they are hiring.
All right. Well, that's great. Lots of great resources there. Again, for anyone tuned in, there's going to be a full recording of this broadcast that you can rewatch, and we'll post all of the links to all the resources that have been noted throughout here. If I were to summarize what all of you said, I think what you said was everyone should think a lot about executive education right now for all of their employees. Is that right? Okay, let's talk about recovery as we move forward, and this is more of an, I guess, editorial question to start, and then we'll get a little bit more specific. But just what are your views on what recovery is going to look like, timing, and what's the city going to look like as we start to recover? I don't know, Kapil, could we start with you?
Sure. So first of all, I believe it'll be a collective effort from everyone involved, business, government, consumers, workers, support agency, a true London effort to help recovery post-COVID. As you can see from both federal and provincial leadership, that the sentiment will be a slow but steady recovery, careful monitoring to make sure healthcare outcomes are not jeopardized in the spirit of fast economic recovery. So I think calculated measures are being deployed every day, every week in that respect. What we also saw in the past with the 2008 recession and other downturns through the recent history, that London is resilient. Our diversity in our industry sectors here in London does help us bounce back relatively quickly. So with that optimism, I think we have a lot of great examples of businesses that are already planning for a recovery and getting prepared to welcome customers back with open arms as soon as things stabilize.
Gerry, what's your view on what this all looks like?
This is going to sound like good cop, bad cop, but I totally agree. Kapil's cited all of the optimistic outlooks for recovery. I have a couple of concerns, and I think it's on everyone's mind, and it may not be the appropriate time to share this, but I think a lot of businesses are now thinking, look, I've got my people working remotely now, and productivity is pretty good. Why do I need this big footprint? Why do I need all this real estate, these huge edifices and buildings, whether it's for banks, insurance companies, educational facilities, etc.? And that's a worrisome thing when you think about how much real estate we have in this country dedicated to business. Will it look the same? And what do we do with that real estate? Because if you don't want it, who does? So that's one thing that puzzles me. The other thing, and I've been a constant hound on debts and deficits all my life. I don't like them. I don't like governments having them. They are necessary evils at times, but we were targeting a debt to GDP ratio in this country of around 25%. It was hovering around 40 before this all happened, and it would have been nice to get to 25. Now the reality looks like we could be north of 150, 200% debt to GDP. And is that a measure? Is it even a fair measure anymore? Because every other country is going to be in the same position. And I guess we'll print more money at some point, but that debt is going to be huge. and it's going to be something that generations from now are going to continue to pay for. I think the reality when we look at recovery is that any of the programs and services you thought should have been there before simply aren't going to be available. We just will not have the money for them, not enough bandwidth at all. And I think you're going to see governments at all levels tuck in. And just for the benefit of the mayor who's on the phone, I couldn't agree more. I think cities are in trouble. We're hearing talk in Vancouver and other large metropolitan areas of the potential for bankruptcy. That's something we can't allow happen. If you let the big cities fail, we all fail.
Ed, you've got I guess the challenge of balancing out the views, right? The positives and the concerns and the micro and the macro. How are you looking at recovery?
Well, firstly, to Gerry and to Kapil, they're both right. I would say as well, though, that from my perspective, I think this is more important to do this right, this recovery, than to do it quick. The polling that we've seen in London certainly affirms that the approach that the Premier, who I think has stood pretty tall in terms of the approach he's taken in terms of a measured response, I think is the right way. I also think that the staging it in is the right way as well. We can feel like we're being incrementalized to death, but I would say to you, I think it's prudent. The other consideration that worries me, that kind of keeps me awake, is we're going through the worst of it now, as we see, and there seems to be a leveling off in London, but provincially, the numbers are staying fairly high, and that concerns me around border cities and GTA, but particular border cities. They've been significantly struck by the high incidence of diagnosis and deaths as well. So while London, and what will happen is, even though London is doing well today, I do not see the Premier acting on a region-specific basis. I think he'll want to open that up province-wide. Because the other thing is, people are transient. So if we go to Toronto for some business as we open it up, and that's a challenge, or Windsor or Sarnia from where we are in London, then that's a challenge. And the thing that concerns me is that when the whole pandemic, the talk really hit its height in going back a couple of months ago, we were talking about an 18 to 24 month scenario. So what you also now have is the situation where what happens, not if, but when a recurrence or a second wave happens, how ready are we going to be for that as well? And that makes me nervous. We will have learned how to deal with things at this level, but how many hits can individuals and businesses take? It's exhausting. And I find if there's any concern I have about the broader community here is the wearisomeness. It's tiresome, it's hard. And when we say to people, we know the weather was good this past weekend, and as we move well past spring into summer, and I think those things will be lifted over time. But I look at festivals and events. We had 40 festivals and events voluntarily decide in London to not handle their events now, and that means next year. And London is known as the city of festivals. And we've got a couple that have still hung on because they're a little later in the season, hopeful that there'll be some movement in terms of crowds and the like. But you look at Budweiser Gardens, you look at the Grand Theater, you look at all the festivals we have, where by their nature those are crowd based, and that's the worrisome thing. So as we go forward, how we adjust to that new normal, I think it'll be dictated based on health. But I am worried about a recurrence, and I'm worried that if we do it too quickly, that what will happen is that we're back to where we are again. And right now, as I say, in London at least, people have been really patient, really supportive, and helpful, because they know there's a greater good. Where can you do something like self-distancing and keeping crowds down and avoiding them, where you get to save a life? And that's what you're doing. So does that have an impact on everything we do in business? I think it does. It certainly has everything we do in our community as well.
Yeah, you talk about the live events business. I used to work in the tennis business. It's just devastating if you're counting on large crowds and a gate. I saw one piece of positive news. It was an NFL stadium in the US, I think it was in Florida, that have announced what their distancing plan looks like. So even whether it gets enacted or not, they're at least forward thinking about trying to not be completely out of business. I don't know if that's the case in London. Do you have some of the venues that are starting to think about how it's more of a volume dial versus an on-off switch?
I would say that everybody's thinking about it. They're trying to say, how can I do my business going forward? We even have a Flex Street in London Dundas place, and it was intended to be opened up as need be to celebrate different things, to have individuals enjoy walking an area not impeded by vehicles. And even that, we haven't opened that up to the public yet. We are concerned about crowds. And look, we've got the May long weekend. Socializing, different things that happen, fireworks that people like to see. I know that in Toronto, for example, they canceled all events to July 3rd, so Canada Day is out. So from that standpoint, all businesses, and we're possessed with this, how they do their business going forward, and how individual citizens interact going forward. I think that that relationship concern will be there long after the Premier says we're open for business. Will individuals be comfortable going into a retail facility? Will people be comfortable having businesses come into their homes to do what needs to get done? I think there's going to be a reshaping of this, of our business approach, and it will not be business as usual.
Yeah, it feels like there's kind of a collective responsibility to work together and help to shape that a little bit too, not just sort of let it happen. We don't have a lot of time left. I was hoping we could take some of the questions that have come in through the queue. There's too many to get to, but I'd like to try to get to a few. Two themes that have come through: a fair number of questions about the arts community, and a few questions about students, both of whom are obviously large and relatively important communities in London. Any comments on either reactions you've seen or advice you would have for students or for the arts?
Well, let me start if I can, and then throw it over to our friends. In speaking to our major school, Western, and as you said, I'm purple and proud, so I have a really strong vested interest in how Western responds. I'm now back on the board of governors at Western as a result of my position, and Fanshawe is in the same situation with international students, because that has been such a critically important part. Not as big as some universities and colleges across the country, but still not insignificant from a revenue standpoint and an employment standpoint. That's a big issue that I'm speaking to the senior administration of both schools now about how they deal with that. I know with LTC, our transit commission, we pared down the routes that gear themselves to the schools because, again, the virtual learning that's going on now, and so how they do their business, they're putting their best minds together as to how they can deal with it. As far as the arts community, the head of the London Arts Council is part of our social impact and recovery, and be it galleries, museums, our London Clay Center, all of those folks that would tend to have things done internally because they have the facilities for it. They're taking a wait and see until the province indicates that they can have more than just 5 people in a I'll say in a facility. So, but that's a concern. Even open air art. You'd think outside you're fine, but again, the self-distancing is going to be a critical issue. The arts we're particularly concerned about in terms of how they're going to be able to do their business going forward. And I think, again, it goes beyond the lifting of certain restrictions that are currently in place.
Kapil, you're really close to Western and Fanshawe. Just hoping you could get a view from you here.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. When we talk about students in London, it's a two-pronged discussion. The one element is students in terms of their experience in London at our post-secondary institutions. So in that respect, there's been lots of announcements at the federal and provincial levels to support students while they're undertaking their education. This includes the Canada Emergency Student Benefit Program. It includes some loan programs to help students cover the financial burden of the education, and several other initiatives to help them complete their education, moving to more of an online delivery mechanism, as we've heard and read lots about. Fanshawe and Western have both been highly effective in deploying online training mechanisms over the last month or so. The other prong of this conversation is education as an industry in London. Education sector is one of the leading employers in our community. In fact, it's one of the top 5. So when you look at the impact of virtual training and students not being able to spend money in our economy the way they normally would, that has a tremendous impact from retail, restaurants, hospitality, tourism, and the overall spin-off benefits that the education sector creates in London. So that in that respect, Western, Fanshawe, and other post-secondary partners in the private sector are working through financial modeling to determine the impact. They're also relying on financial support at the federal and provincial level to help them weather the storm. And come September, we'll know the true impact of some of these developments.
Gerry, what are your members telling you about continuing to support the arts going forward, and any comments in that sort of area?
Sure, just building on Kapil's point. So the last time we did a number check on this, there's about 13,000 foreign students that are taking part in educational systems here at both Fanshawe and Western. The great percentage of those are from Asia. And if you consider that between $45,000 and $50,000 is the average amount of money that those students drop in our community each year, that's a huge economic impact, and they are one of the largest employers, as you know. Here's what worries me. Yes, we've got support programs in place for them right now, but what about, as we cast our minds forward, what about the restriction on travel? Are they going to decide, the Asian parents of these students, that, look, this is no longer viable for them to come to Ontario or to Canada? I know, talking to Peter Devlin, it's a great concern to him, and that would be a huge economic impact on our city. I've got, on the art side, I've got a lot of empathy for the gig economy. A lot of friends in that space that perform, whether it's music or art, and they just have nowhere to work. And I'm not sure that many of them will qualify for some of these relief programs, but they've been virtually out of work for a better part of 7 weeks now, and frankly, the horizon in the near future isn't looking that well for them either.
Again, we talked about collective responsibility a few minutes ago. It feels like it's incumbent on sort of all of us to get behind those communities if there aren't specific programs or supports in place. I know that's something that the university is thinking about. Just one comment from me on international students. Easy to take a pretty dire look at that. There is some good news in that our modeling says a fair number of the students we're talking about are already in country. And so don't have to travel to be back, for a summer semester or for a fall semester. So it's at least it's not an absolute in those terms. Sean, you've been watching the chat and the Q&A. We don't have much time left. What have we not gotten to? Do you think we should?
I think maybe the one of the important themes that keeps coming up at a bit more of a micro personal level is how individuals can get involved. So we've looked a lot at businesses and communities. What in your view can I as an individual do if I want to help out?
So I can start there, Mark.
Good, Phil.
Okay, sorry, Mayor. On our COVID Business Hub site that Gerry had mentioned earlier, and I see the link has been shared with all panelists, there's a particular segment that talks about how can individuals and businesses help. Locally, there are several manufacturers that have contacted us looking to pivot and supply different products and tools and equipment for healthcare. So there are sections for those type of resources. Provincially, there are Ontario Together websites that offer that kind of connectivity as well. I should also say, generally speaking, I mean, there are lots of members in our community who want to volunteer or provide their assistance in this time. Pillar nonprofit network runs a very efficient volunteer connection service. So I'd encourage people to look at the resources Pillar has to offer just from a community volunteering standpoint. But certainly our business hub provides a lot of information on how businesses can help as well.
Let's go to Gerry, and then maybe we'll give the last word to the mayor.
Yeah, my encouragement, if you're looking to help, again, go to that website that Kapil just mentioned. But if you want to go just to the Chamber's website and click on the banner that goes across the main landing page, you'll get to a section that refers to members doing good. And I think if you look at what others are doing in terms of donations, retooling, pivoting their manufacturing lines, et cetera, and a lot of this is done free. So if you're looking to volunteer or help or provide products and services, I would do two things. Look at that site, but make sure that you're not volunteering to do something that there's a massive amount of already. Frankly, I think there's probably an overabundance of sanitizer being produced right now. Whether it's all in the distribution chain or not yet remains to be seen, but I think in terms of volume, there's lots of that stuff out there now. Masks may be another story, but take a good look at who's got it already before you decide to start manufacturing more. In other words, do an inventory analysis, see if you've got a product and service that makes sense for that.
Mr. Mayor, maybe we could wrap with you, and then we'll remind everybody where they can find the various resources. How can Londoners get involved and help?
I think that's the key question. The first thing I would say to Londoners and to London business, first thing I would say is follow the rules, please. That's probably the most important thing that individuals can do. So when we talk about crowds and physical distancing and also for businesses that do curbside and or allow a certain number of people in the store, don't start upping the numbers just because. Follow the rules would be the very first thing I'd say. The second thing I would indicate is that support local business. If there's a sense that I hear from business and is that it's their hope that when this is done, people in London will appreciate the sacrifices that they've had to make. Please support local businesses. That really does matter. We're not an island, but London is an urban oasis in a sea of agriculture. So if you have the opportunity to buy outside or online outside, buy inside if you can. I think that would help business in a huge way. I would say to businesses, I invite them to join the Economic Task Force. We've got a number of organizations represented, but you know what? Helping inform us as to what their issues are, what their recovery approach is, their concerns, that's helpful, really helpful to us. In terms of volunteering, you've heard some of that. I know the food bank in London is looking to have people specifically help them assemble their packages that they're looking to do. And finally, from a financial standpoint, if people have the wherewithal, we've got two major groups, the United Way and the London Community Foundation, who are taking the monies through the special drives and distributing it to frontline agencies where they deem a need. So I would say, please, if you have that ability to help, do that as well, and that will go a big distance. Finally, if people want to stay informed of what's going on, I promise to get back to you on this. We stream live every Monday to Friday, every day on Rogers TV. The second that is that Radio 980 CFPL covers us live on radio and online. CTV's website carries us, and the Health Unit's YouTube channel. So there's a few ways for people just to stay informed. And I think that's the final thing. Stay informed. Don't get ahead of the curve, because we want to keep that curve flattened. And we'll get through this together.
So we started asking if we would get a scoop, and an urban oasis in a sea of agriculture. I think we've got the scoop on the city's next tagline. So there we go. We got what we were looking for. Sean, we're up against it as always. Can you just remind everyone where to find the recording and how we'll do the follow-up?
Sure. A bunch of questions coming in through the chat about where to find all of these great links and resources. We will follow up with an emailed link to the video recording along with a list of all those links. So we'll follow up with our panelists offline, and all of our attendees today can expect that in their emails later this afternoon.
Great, thanks. Let's leave it there. Gerry and Kapil and Ed, we don't take your time for granted. We don't take your candor for granted. Lots to think about today. Thanks so much for making time and being so forthright in your answers. Appreciate it. To everyone who tuned in, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks so much for having us. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks,
doing this.
Mark.